Welcome to the second annual Legalpalooza. Nice. Like it. I'm Ellen Strauss. I'm the Associate Director in the Office of Career Planning. And on behalf of the office, we are so excited to have you guys here. When our office put this on last year for the first time, we had no idea what to expect, but it was a success. So we decided to make it an annual event, and we're really excited about this year. I want to say thank you to a few groups of people specifically. First, to the students for being here. You guys have made a great step in your professional development just by being here and being engaged. I want to thank the student organizations specifically because they have co-sponsored the sessions that we're doing throughout the day, including this one, and they have donated a lot of time and a lot of support, and we really appreciate it. So if you see anyone with a student agent under their name, on their name tag, those are our student volunteers. I want to say thank you to the Office of Career Planning because we really pulled together as a team on this, and I really, really appreciate it, and appreciate every single one of our team members. And then I also want to extend a hearty thank you to the practitioners who are here and the ones who will be arriving throughout the day, because the students' ability to meet you, get to know you, and learn from you is a critical part of their legal education. And we really appreciate you guys being part of our community and supporting us. I'm especially pleased to have our keynote speaker here, Miriam Rivera, and the Dean Tresvenia, will be introducing her.
Thanks, Alan, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be here at the second annual Legalpalooza. This is the second time I've been here. So everything about I'm doing now is my second annual effort at doing things. But this is a really, really important program. I'm really pleased to see that we've got a full house for our speaker. And for me, when I talk about USF being the training ground for the next generation of lawyers and leaders, I actually think of people like Miriam. Miriam, from her academic excellence, from her service in the community, and being a very, very effective lawyer, brings the kind of skills and brings the kind of approach that I think we want to be very much involved with here. So you have a very receptive audience today. Miriam, as you know, has been Deputy General Counsel at Google. She's now heading to the Minerva project. We got to know each other a number of years ago. We were both honored on the same day as the Hispanic National Bar Association Male Attorney of the Year and Female Attorney of the Year. And it was great to get to know you then. But over the years, in terms of having being dedicated in your day-to-day job as an attorney, but also making sure you have time not only for community work, bar leadership, and serving the entire community, and in her current work, bringing to life the ideas and innovations that put San Francisco, put the Bay Area at the forefront of so many great ideas. So we've got a great speaker here. I'm very pleased that you were able to come by, and I want to introduce you to our wonderful graduates and current students, future graduates. So without further ado, welcome Miriam Rivera to the University of San Francisco.
So this is one of the more, and also let me know in the back of the room if you guys have any problem hearing me, because I can always turn up the mic or kind of turn up the volume. Good. Okay, great. So this is one of the more fun kind of talks I think I've actually done at one of these events, because nobody's ever done a bond Legalpalooza that I know of. And so it kind of gave me a chance to think about the theme, and were there anything that I thought I could kind of transmit from the bond theme to this audience. And you know, please know that I'm not a post-feminist something or other, but so I'm only going to look at the good parts of James Bond and what we might learn from him and how that might apply to careers in the law and your own thought process about what you'd like to do moving forward. So one of the things that I'll start off with is, there's this kind of illusion at times that there's a lot of glamour in the law. And if you watch the TV shows like Suits and everything, you just think everybody walks around in designer clothes, and the files that they turn over on an M&A are like one folder, and I'm kind of like, where are these people living? Just to walk around and do one little Series A, I'm like carting grocery bags between my car and the house. So I don't, the reality of practicing law is often not what it's portrayed to be in the media. There really is just a lot of heavy lifting, and I mean physically pulling those folders around and carrying them from one space to another, and sitting on your knees and shredding documents, and finding signature pages. I've been doing a lot of that even now, 20 years into my career, as we do our series financing for Minerva. So one is, don't be disappointed when you actually enter the practice and find that there are points where it is not going to live up to the glamorous expectations that you may have of law school. I'll share one anecdote from my personal life. On the night that my husband and I became engaged, we were supposed to leave the next day for a trip to Hawaii. And I was working on an IPO at Robeck, Flager, and Harrison down in the Valley. And I needed to leave the data room ready. And again, this was a room full of documents related to that transaction. And I needed to go through a stack of papers and leave things in good shape for the team that was going to be working over the next week. And unbeknownst to me, my husband wanted to get engaged that night. So I keep calling him and saying, well, it's going to take me longer and longer. And he's just like, is there anything I can do to help? And I'm kind of like, oh, I don't know. But, he comes over, and I basically said, well, we do need to just go through this pile of documents and see if the signature pages are signed and, things are dated and, that sort of stuff. So he goes through and goes through a whole set of documents in a box, and he determines that there's a bunch of them that have no signatures and no dates and so forth. I said, okay, well, throw that in the recycler, and I'll call the printer and have them send over the correct set, because they sent over the uncorrected set. And he goes, you mean I just did all that work and it's going to go in the recycler? And I said, yes. He goes, I thought I would want to go to law school. When he was in high school, he was a big debater and traveled for debate tournaments. And I think that one incident disabused him of the notion that he would ever want to go to law school. And eventually we did get out and get engaged because he helped with the heavy lifting. Another thing that I think we can learn from, and you see how Bond, there's a lot of glamour in Bond, but there's a lot of the times when he's just sitting around being beat up and running. So that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of abuse that he takes in his work, and I kind of think of lawyers as somewhat of an abused category of human. It's always the last man standing or the last person standing. If somebody's working on a deal, the business people go home, it might be 2 a.m. and you're there till 4. And that's just kind of how it is, so that the trains keep on going on schedule. Everybody is getting their, things done that really need to happen. The other thing is, I think we could learn from Bond. One is he's always given some sort of a mission, and the client wants him to accomplish certain things. And he then goes out and actually confronts the reality of what that means to solve, to kind of achieve the mission. And oftentimes he does stuff that really upsets M. Right? he ends up like crashing very expensive vehicles, having them, these experimental devices that Q comes up for him, destroyed in the process of the mission. And so one is, I think a lot of the times it's important to focus on, are you actually accomplishing the mission, or, doing what your client is asking you to do? And there are times when your judgment and your personal ethics are going to be involved in terms of how can you accomplish the mission and do it in the best way possible. And that may mean sometimes paying attention to what your client wants, but making sure that the ultimate goal is achieved. And that ultimate goal is an organizational goal, not the goal of a particular individual who is working on behalf of your client. So that can feel quite pressured at times when you're really having an individual who exerts certain pressures on a deal, for example, or in some sort of legal situation where judgment and ethics may be at question. So, the thing to always remember is that that individual is not your client. The organization that you work for, the higher goals of that organization, the long-term interests of that organization are your clients. It's up to you to navigate the individuals in order to achieve the ultimate goal and the ultimate mission for the client. And I think that's, oftentimes that means that you have to have space and understanding of individual goals and people, ability to confront and have conflicts at times with individuals who may not see things the way that you do. It also means, in our case as lawyers, helping your client, the individual client, to understand both the law and the reason for the law. So like, for example, if you're working on a securities offering, there may be times when you're required to make, and I know maybe you're not all going to be working on securities offerings, but there will be times in your career where you're going to have to make disclosures for one reason or another. And your client is worried about, will that disclosure have some negative impact on their organization? And the thing to help them understand oftentimes is that usually more disclosure is better than less, that people who understand what it is that they're getting themselves into are less likely to litigate, less likely to feel taken advantage of, and you try to work with those kind of human dynamics, for example, in working with a particular client. One of the things that I really like about James Bond is that he finds a way to make fun in the service of his country. So, in a lot of ways, James Bond is a very mission-driven individual, right? He is out there trying to prevent all these nefarious people from taking over the world, using it for their own personal advantage or gain. And he has to do a lot of tough stuff, a lot of fights, a lot of killing, a lot of, he doesn't really have much of a life apart from his work that we see. So he's made quite a few sacrifices to be in that kind of mission-driven environment. But the guy doesn't forget how to have fun. And I think there's something to be said for that, because the practice of law can both be tedious and it can also be high conflict. And you may work with people who often don't appreciate the need for legal review. They don't necessarily appreciate how much time this all seems to take and how much it costs. So if you think about trying to figure out how to have fun in the service of the work that you're doing, I think that's an important thing. And for me, for example, one of the things I just really enjoy working with people, I'm kind of a law geek. So when I help people understand the law, I get to feel a little bit like John, probably as an educator, helping to pass along my really fundamental respect for this being a country of laws. Like, I'm the kind of person who reads the Constitution, I still cry about it. And I think it's important for people to understand how great this system of laws is. And yes, it does cause costs and it does cause delay, but it's actually fundamentally providing the system through which all of the kinds of great things that we try to do here in law school, in the community organizations that you may work for, in the government, in business to happen, and to happen in a way that facilitates an economy that really is still a flagship economy of the world. So, try to figure out how to have fun. And, if we all got the nice little tools that he gets, like the little plane that goes under the sea or whatever, that'd be really fun. But in the absence of that, turn to the people that you work with, the clients, and have fun in the interactions that you're going to have as much as you can, because there will be times when there's a lot of conflict, and there are times when you will have a lot of tedium. So it's important to try to develop a capacity to enjoy the parts of the practice that you can, and to really take joy in some of the craft of it. I remember one of the important books that I read in trying to decide on a career was Joseph Campbell, and he wrote about finding your bliss. And one of the things that he said was that in order to know that you found your bliss, you should love the minutia of the things that you do. And if you think about the minutia of the practice of law, a lot of it is kind of like going to school. You get to read a lot with a lot of care. You get to write a lot. You get to make arguments. You get to interact with people. You get to advocate a position, persuade people of different things. So there's a lot that is, for me, being a school nerd, you don't go to 20-something years worth of school without really loving it. I found that the minutia of the legal practice is actually very enjoyable. And I remember at one point at Google, I had been elevated to vice president and deputy general counsel, and I now had not my own workload. I didn't have my own contracts that I was working on, my own deals, because I was now managing a huge group of people, and I would be a bottleneck if I had my own deal flow. And so I had to give up drafting contracts. And there was a point when I literally cried because I felt like I didn't get to do anything productive anymore. And I didn't really get to just sit and think hard thoughts and be able to write them down and have the sense of accomplishment of producing something physical compared to just helping other people to do it, which was also fun in its own way. But I could tell that I loved the minutia. I think it's important to understand how important it is to love the work that you do. I learned that really early as a lawyer. I worked at Brobeck, Flager & Harrison, and my partner, his name is Tom Kellerman, that I worked for, and he developed pancreatic cancer. He was about 40 years old. He had 2 young children. And the guy was coming to work at Brobeck every day as much as he could when he was in treatment. And pancreatic cancer has a really low survival rate. So I was stunned, frankly, to see him there. And, I took it upon myself to just say, you have this really not great diagnosis. Why are you coming to work every day when you've got 2 kids at home and your wife, and you might not be around to see them grow up? And he said, there is just nothing I would rather do than be here and be with the people that I've worked with, work with the clients that I have, and I'm certainly making time for my family, and I always have, but he really wanted to be there. And the outpouring of affection for this man at work that you could see from his clients, they were sending plants and food and stuffed animals, and when he went into the hospital, all of us associates got together and developed personal gift baskets, and mine was based on things that I thought he could do from the hospital bed, and I gave him copies of my favorite movies and my favorite music, and basically introduced him to Ella Fitzgerald, and he never really spent any time with that, and he's a big fan. So even in his illness, he's just an inspiration to a lot of people, and taught me right away, do not settle. Do not settle for something that you don't feel like that about. And he's a securities lawyer. I mean, it's not going to be the same thing for everyone. I certainly, when I was practicing securities law, it didn't end up becoming the thing that I ultimately did, right? I do it, but it's not been the thing where I think I've made my difference was probably more in commercial and intellectual property law. And I really got a kick and enjoyed that, and thought securities law was frankly a little dull. So every one of us, being geeks in whatever way we are, may find a different area of the law to make our passion, but it is important to try to find it because it will sustain you even in the hardest of times. So those are some of the key lessons that I learned. One of them, another thing I like about James Bond is that he talks about his preferences. And does anybody know how James Bond likes his martinis? Shaken, not stirred, right? We all know how he likes his martinis. And one thing, though, is there's one episode where somebody gives him a stirred martini, and he takes it, and he looks at it, and he says, it's perfect. So know your preferences, but be flexible. Be kind. Life, there's so many things that are important to know about yourself, but keep trying different things until you find your place. Some of the people that I know who have lasted the longest in the practice of law have changed careers multiple times within the last 20 years. They have practiced securities law, workers' compensation law, corporate law, criminal law, appellate law. These are two different people that I'm talking about. And they both have landed in places that work for them. One of them I met as a securities attorney at Brobeck and is working a lot in workers' comp law, and another one is working on appellate criminal cases and did special victims unit in LA and all. And I just thought, oh my God, this little 5'2" African American woman, against these really hardcore criminals. She loved the practice of law, and she was very successful as a prosecutor, and is now very successful and has even gone to the Supreme Court as an appellate lawyer. And it took her a while to figure out that that's what she wanted to do, because she first started out doing the big firm, then working for Wells Fargo in corporate law, and then kind of eventually deciding, I really don't like this. I want to do something. She kind of remembered that she wanted to go into law to actually litigate, and she liked the criminal practice the best. Whereas I did a criminal case as a pro bono in my first summer at Jenner and Block, and had to go to the jailhouse and read all the cases. I have to tell you, just reading the cases was enough to make me never want to be a criminal lawyer. And let alone having to see the physical evidence involved. But that's just me. I used to, when they prick your finger, I used to just throw up or pass out. So just was not the right field. And in fact, I've been called to criminal court as a juror twice. And both times I've had the same judge. And then after the last time, he told me, Miss Rivera, you should go to the clerk and tell them that they should only call you for civil matters. I just have too much empathy for the victims or something, it's the kind of person that they do not want on a jury. So the other thing, and I tried to do this as a top 10, but really it didn't come out to be that way. And I think that it doesn't matter, but because there's still a lot that I think we could plumb from this. One of the things that you notice about James Bond is, he's kind of a ladies' man, but he has never actually had a relationship with Moneypenny. So when you are working, remember to set your boundaries and your limits. I think more people get into trouble mixing too much of their personal and professional lives. And as much as James Bond mixes pleasure and business, he seems to know that there is a line to draw. So I would recommend that to all of you as well. And, lastly, one of the things that we talk about in the practice of law is civility, and how, has it really changed so much and people are so uncivil. Enjoy your contracts classes. It'll be the most useful things you've ever learned to do. Sorry, I got left off. Moneypenny. No, we were on with beyond Moneypenny. Civility. So we talk about people lacking civility in the practice of law. And if you'll notice, James Bond is extremely polite at all times. He is unflappable, and he is great under stress. He does not take out his stress on anyone else. And I think that's an important characteristic that we all could develop as attorneys in the practice of law, because it is stressful. You will work long hours. You will work under extreme time pressure. You will work under extreme budget pressure. You will work with clients who want a particular outcome regardless of what the law says. And it's important, I think, to develop your ability to keep calm and unflappable under pressure. So, and the last reason why I think we can learn something from James Bond is that good always wins. And I think it's important for us that are, in some area where we want good outcomes on behalf of our clients, whatever cause we have. Like I work for Minerva, I work for Google, I work for a lot of tech companies. I really do see the value in what they're bringing to the world, obviously in education, information, etc. And for me, I'm looking at that as a cause and a purpose. And we all have, whatever trips your trigger in terms of purpose, but it's important to keep the faith that good things will ultimately out, because there's days when you lose. There's days when the deal dies. There's days when your clients are just hard to deal with. And at the end of the day, you need to really believe that you're working in something that matters, that you're bringing something to the world that is important for it to be there, and that ultimately, goodness wins. And that's one reason why I think James Bond is still around 20 years later. It's one of the top franchise of the film industry, because we all need to be reminded every day that good does out. So that's it. I will leave time for questions and answers as well. Thank you. Anybody. And it could be about anything. You can ask about personal things, work-life balance. You can ask about race in the law, whatever you like.
I have a question about education. So, do you have a JD? Do you have some sort of MBA or business background that allows you to do the work you do in-house? And if you don't, would you suggest an MBA? Do you think that that's something helpful?
I do have both. I have a JD and an MBA, and when I was trying to decide whether I wanted to do both, I went and did what your career counselors tell you to do, which is go information interview a bunch of people. So I probably interviewed like 40 or so people that were students and practitioners, and both MBA grads and MBA students, law school grads and law school students. And at the end of the day, I couldn't figure out which one to do. So I did both of them. And I have to say, it's been one of the best decisions I made, because it gave me a ton of empathy for my clients. And I don't know if you guys talk about design thinking at all in law school right now, but this is kind of a craze on the Stanford campus. And one of the things that they try to do when they're looking at product development and in technology in general is to develop empathy for the needs of the customer in the design of products for a particular customer. And since I ended up practicing business law, having that empathy of understanding the goals of business, understanding the language of business, I think it did make me a better lawyer. I think it made me more successful more early in my career than I would have been if I hadn't had that background. I also think it gave me personal flexibility that, I have kind of done both sides of law and business in my career. I found that to be personally fulfilling because, I'm curious and I like learning. Yes, sir, back there.
So, you said ask you anything.
I will say no if I find it too personal, but that's fine.
The opposite of personal. You used to practice securities law. Do you have any thoughts on the Jobs Act or the Crowd Fund Act that Congress just came out with 2012?
In general, I find it to be a good thing. And in fact, I have helped to provide testimony through one of my companies that was called ProFounder in that process of developing the Jobs Act, because ProFounder was put out of business by the Department of State Corporations of California because they claimed that they needed to have a certain type of license in order to help people try to meet the blue sky laws of all 50 states, and that they couldn't, through software, enable that process. Unlike filing your taxes, which you're enabled to use whatever software you like to do it, they were making a distinction around helping people to meet blue sky laws in the 50 states in order to fund their small businesses and tech companies. And so, in general, I believe that it is a good thing for more things that are complex to be simplified and to be made available to more people at a lower price, and hopefully with the right incentives to maintain information as transparently as possible. So that product, I think, is a good thing. I think that helping people to be able to fund their business is a good thing. I do have concerns about people investing in crowd-funded environments without appropriate diligence. And I think that there is a need for, if you're going to create these kinds of laws, there should be mechanisms to help develop education so people don't lose their shirts betting on what they think is the next great thing and really turns out to be a Ponzi scheme. So very big supporter of it, and also think we need to create more education around appropriately diligencing companies before you do any crowdfunding investing. Yes, sir.
You mentioned, you don't always end up with clients that you get along with really well. What is your tip on dealing with tough customers?
Well, since this is a Jesuit school, I'll really talk personally because it's a spiritual thing. People are people, and at the end of the day, I find that the only way to really deal with a human being, regardless of how difficult they may be for me to get along with, is to always remember that there is a part of them that is the Christ itself. I'm a Christian. I believe that there's a part of everyone, and I know that might not be, I'm not Christian enough to think everyone has to be Christian. I know there's people that do, right? But I do believe that every person has a higher spirit within themselves, and I am always trying to find that part in other people. And through that optimism and through the sense that we're all kind of on the spiritual journey, progressing as well as we can. And that I myself am on a spiritual journey and full of flaws, then it is okay and easier for me to be able to manage difficult people, because I have seen my own shadow side and I have seen my own darkness, and therefore I understand that I can't condemn others for it, even if it's painful or personally difficult for me to deal with. And it happens in real life. I mean, I have tremendous difficulty at times with some of the people I've had to interact with, but it's all coming down to human nature and how you see yourself and how you see other people. And in general, I believe we're all trying to evolve to the highest state we can.
What are the main bullet points of the checklist that you go through to decide whether you want to be a first-hand combatant in the good versus evil? You say that good always outs evil. Sometimes you're a spectator and sometimes you're a first-hand participant. So how do you decide whether or not to engage?
Well, again, I guess I'll say it's a bit of a spiritual calling. I believe that if you find something to be engaging, fun, sound challenging, attracts you, that's happening for a reason, and that it's not like everyone's going to have the same call, that you're going to end up, you're going to find something really to be passionate about in environmental law, or you're going to find something to be really passionate about in, criminal prosecution. People are going to have their own different reason for why they feel called or compelled to go into places. But I think it's important to listen to the voice that is telling you, yes, I want to pursue this. And, I don't know why corporate intellectual property stuff got me engaged, frankly. Like, my family is migrant farm workers and factory workers. I didn't speak English when I went to Head Start. I was a Title I low-income school kid. So it just happened to be the thing that I found, like, wow, I'm leaning in to try to figure out what the hell goes on here. What is this thing called the stock market? I don't even know what a security is, right? I found that engaging intellectually. I really loved the commercial practice because you got to just make stuff up. It's not defined so much by precedent as other areas of the law. So I found it to be a creative environment for me to work. And it's just but I think, it's going to be a different thing for each one of us. But that was for me, the thing that engaged me. Yes, miss?
Diversity now, in the corporate or business area, is it as far as hiring women, people of color, and also age? Does that play a lot now?
I feel much older than I used to. Like, when I came in, I'm like, God, law school students are looking younger every year. So yeah, there's definitely issues in different areas. I'm both, I'm Latina. I am, relatively dark-skinned. I grew up in a different class environment from a lot of folks that are practicing law. And, I'm a woman. I have children. I also, I'm in a mixed-race marriage. There's a lot of diversity stuff that could come up, and it certainly has. But I have found in particular, and maybe that's another reason why I liked working in Silicon Valley, was that diversity seemed less of a barrier in my career than it might have in more traditional areas of practice. Like when I looked at, being a partner in a law firm, there just weren't that many people like me doing a lot of the leadership of law firms at the time that I was coming up. And, there frankly weren't a lot. Like by the time I was evaluating whether I wanted to be the general counsel of Google, there were, I think, 8 minority women GCs of Fortune 500 companies. So a pretty small group even then. And we're not talking about that long ago. But, and again, this is going to sound kind of trite, but it really is about people and being authentic to yourself as a leader and as an attorney. So I've worked on deals up to $5 billion in value. And I've worked against some of the nastiest New York attorneys you could probably ever face in your career. And there have been just literally times when I've gone home and just felt exhausted by the nastiness of practice at where people are like, for me, unnecessarily uncivil. And I found that knowing myself and knowing who I was gave me a lot of strength to face that kind of opposition. So one way to think about it is the hardships that you know make you who you are and they make you stronger. If you know yourself as sometimes different, sometimes excluded, as sometimes unwelcome, I think that gives you a tremendous amount of empathy and compassion for people. And it also allows you, hopefully, to be self-reflective of what you do and how you are as a person. And that gives you like this sense of wholeness, integrity that you bring into every interaction you have with people. And I would sometimes laugh literally out loud because I'd be up against, these big guys that would be very nasty, using very bad language. And I think they just thought that they were going to intimidate me because I was a woman and I'm not that big or brawny or whatever. And I would just laugh because I thought, shit, you just don't know the road I've traveled to be where I am. I started with nothing. I have, lived in tenements with rodents, with roaches. I have, eaten white rice with eggs for dinner because my mom is out of work for a year. I have just literally, close McDonald's and come home at 2 a.m. to do my homework and get back to school at 7:30 in the morning to get to be here. And if you think that you're going to intimidate me, you just don't know who you're dealing with. So knowing yourself, standing in that reality of who you are, what you've done, what you bring to the table, it overcomes a lot of barriers. Yes?
Do you think it's beneficial for both to practice in a law firm before going to in-house?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, I know people always tell you that anyway, and a lot of in-house departments won't hire you anyway without prior experience. And some of it is, about the hazing culture of being a lawyer. There's a lot of pain that you need to go through, I think, to become a tough, seasoned, experienced lawyer who can, come into a room and, clear all those files out, tell everybody what to do, when to do it, what's going to happen next. There is some advantage of paying your dues in these environments and having to do that kind of work. There's certainly credibility that is given to you whether or not you actually did anything useful, but hopefully you actually get to do some useful things when you're practicing. And, I found it to be an interesting developmental experience to be in a law firm for some amount of time. I wasn't there for a very long time anyway, just because I grew up in the 90s where there was just tons of opportunity, and I happened to eventually go start up a company in the late 90s, only a few years out from having been at law school and business school. So, and my kind of trajectory shifted because of that. But yeah, there's advantages. The time pressures, the kind of big cases that you work on, learning how to manage that kind of complexity, it certainly is helpful.
Were you at Pro back when it went under?
Mm-mm. I was at Google by the time it went under.
Were you there for very long?
Well, I still kept in touch with people that were there, and the partner that I worked with was still there trying to help keep the firm together when it went under, and he's now at a different firm, obviously. But it was one of these kinds of things where, sometimes people lose sight of the value of what they have. That was the time when it was like the rah-rah 90s. Brobeck had always been kind of a conservative firm. We used to have our offices on the other side of 101, the east side of 101, right? So the lower rent district. And then they wanted to move into the highest rent district possible. Also, they wanted to, fire clients like Oracle and only work for pets.com. And those ended up being good decisions. And I think that one of the things that I've learned from the cycles of Silicon Valley is the importance of kind of living under your means if possible. I think that's important regardless as an individual as well as companies, because most of the time when companies have had really big downfalls, it's usually overinvestment overly quickly. And that was true at Ariba, where I went right before Google. I was there, and they had grown from 400 to 2,000 and then went down to 700 in the 2001 time frame. And part of that was a huge investment in real estate that ended up being a really, badly timed investment because they overbuilt a campus. They needed less than one building. They built 4 towers, and then the crisis happened, and they thought, well, we'll always be able to sublease the space. Well, guess what? When business goes down to nothing, most people don't need a lot more space. And so the value of real estate declined at the same time as software licensing revenues throughout the Silicon Valley. So the important lesson, I think, is to be conservative fiscally regardless of good times. Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk about what you're doing with the Minerva project?
So I'm the COO and the general counsel, and I feel like I wear a ton of hats, probably more than I ever have before, and maybe too many. But so one hat is university operations, another hat is business operations, a third hat is kind of financial, the financial piece of the company, legal piece. And the student side of the business is essentially helping to create the infrastructure that you guys so enjoy and don't even know exists, right? Like the registrar's office, the career office, all these wonderful services that have been developed, and all the talent that serves you in different ways has been identified. And as a new institution, we're just developing all of that kind of infrastructure around supporting our students. So that's one piece. And then we're a growing tech company, and we need things like HR policies and HR posters in the right places, and we need to be able to figure out how to make sure everybody actually signs that employee inventions and confidentiality agreement when they start with the company. So there's a lot of that kind of piece as well. And then there's just the day-to-day. I would say that business has two languages, legal and accounting. And so trying to help figure out better financial information systems, budgeting systems, and also, how do we get different deals that we're working on done to try to either license our technology to third parties or potentially attract more students through recruiting partnerships, that kind of thing. So it's all over the place, basically, and I help find new dorm space and help negotiate leases, and it's a pretty big job. Help figure out how to get students into the country, because a lot of our students, 80% of them are international, and we needed to be able to get F1 visa status for them coming into the country. So lots of legal stuff there too. But whatever walks in the door, basically, I do, except teach students, I think. Any other questions? I don't want to keep people too long if you have something going on, but I'm happy to stay and answer a couple of things. Yeah.
I just have one question, which is, what motivated you to make this move to the Minerva project? I know you've just been there a couple of months now, and it's very exciting and a huge move, and it sounds like when you talked about finding the path and finding what your passion is, so I assume, of course, that this is something that really has inspired you to join it. Can you tell us about what your thinking was to make that big decision?
Yeah, so when I left Google, I started up an investment fund called Ulu Ventures. And one of the first things that I discovered was that there was this new area of technology that was emerging called education technology. And having been at Google, I found that to be a really interesting space to look at. And over the last 6 or 7 years, I had developed quite a portfolio in the education technology space of companies that I thought were doing interesting things to either support education, again, either operationally or in the actual transmission of knowledge. And education had been a passion for me, always. From the first day I went to Head Start, and I found a new kind of heaven, because we didn't have books in my house growing up, and there were books and manipulables and toys and other things, and so it was just a really cool environment, and I never wanted to miss school. And then after I graduated from Stanford, I actually went into higher education administration. So my first career was actually working in the Career Services Center, promoting internships and careers in the not-for-profit sector. And I had done counseling and classes and peer counseling programs during the time I was at Stanford, and eventually I worked for UC Santa Cruz in student affairs. And then I'd kind of decided, well, I wanted something where I was more intellectually working with stuff, and that's why I like law, because I do find it to be very intellectually challenging. And I went into technology because I like the information space. And why? partly because of my own life story. Like, I'd literally been the kid that translated for adults my whole life, from Spanish to English. I went to the Social Security Administration, the Public Health Department, this and that. I understood bureaucracy like nobody's business by the time I was 9 years old. And so I did really like a lot of helping people to navigate complexity. And I went on to work in information at Google and realized that that was one of the true callings of my life. And, it sounds kind of ridiculous, like it's just a tech company, isn't it? But I really felt that I was making the information that used to be locked up in those bureaucracies available to people every day, everywhere around the world, and that in itself could empower people in ways that for us had been so difficult, and we had been, often marginalized, because I'd be with somebody who had no education and an accent and, just didn't know how to navigate that kind of environment. And to be able to feel like you were unlocking what used to be kept behind those doors and give it to people for free was just an amazing place to work. And education is kind of like that, like where it feels now the technology that can support education for more people in more places in the world, it's there. We're getting to a level where the internet is sufficiently powerful that you could power interactive education through technology. And given the shortage of teachers, great teachers that there are in this world, I think that's a tremendous, powerful tool. And I really find that Minerva is one of the examples of trying to do extremely high quality interactive education online. And I want to be at that forefront because I think, it's starting off in this small liberal arts, more elite education, but that technology is going to get better and better, and more people are going to have access to more education and great teachers because we're going to create that functionality in the world. So that's why Minerva. Well, thank you.
Sharing your personal,